morning, all the Sangha members and the participants. And today is the second day International Conference on Vinaya. And in the morning session, we have a little bit change. There are three speakers. It's a Bhikkhu Bodhipala, the first doctor. And second one is Jnana Ratna. And third one is Bhante Ananda. But as we have a sad news in the morning, that one of the oldest members of the Mahabodhi Society in Bangalore, he passed away. So Anand Bhante has to rush for the last flight. So Anand Bhante will present his paper first. Jamnu Gindu Gitena, Tene, Tamju Dive, Yajit Sundini Bati, Dinata, Somshorunge, Duazabasum Jiti Rugure, Ineata, Jipni George, and the Mahabodhi Society, Bangalore Kinanola, Long up to Shantation, Eje Kendeji, and Chimangalam to Judo, Chatanga, and Anand Bhante, and then Pepper Chati to Chatanda Korangi. Things but Reshakina, Tambodia, you are this stroke, and then they can do it again. Chimangalam to do and teacher to Murdown, and then to JK. So now I just request Anand Bhante to present his paper. There's a little mistake in the printing. It's Upasaka vow. It's not a Upasaka vow, but it's a Uposhat vows. So now I request Anand Bhante to begin his talk.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Salutations to the Triple Gem. And very, very humble salutations to the abbot and all the Sangha here. Today, it is my pleasure to present a paper on Uposatha procedure in Theravada. And I am very grateful to the moderator for giving me this change of timing. The path of Lord Buddha, which is the Noble Eightfold Path, which we can also classify it as Shila, Samadhi and Panya. That is the path, the royal path. Whether it is Theravada or Mahayana or Vajrayana, the basic Four Noble Truths are the basics and common to all. And this Noble Eightfold Path is the only path to enlightenment explained in all traditions. So that is a very good common ground for all of us to be together and work together. In this Noble Eightfold Path, normally we classify it as Shila, Samadhi and Prajna. Shila is moral purification, Samadhi is concentration and mental development, and wisdom is the ultimate mental capability which purifies the mind. Now, Shila is explained according to Vishuddhimagga. Shila is elaborately explained, and for monks, the Shila is Patimokha Samvara Shila, that is restraint according to the Patimokha rules. Ajiva Parisuddhi Shila, the purification through right livelihood. For monks, the right livelihood is to get the requisites in accordance with the rules. Then Indriya Samvara Sila, the restraint through controlling the senses. And Pachaya Sannisita Sila, how we use the requisites that we have received as monks. So here, the Patimokha Samvara Shila is the first one, and it is very, very important. Patimokha Samvara Shila is restraint and purification according to the Patimokha or Pratimoksha, which our Supreme Lord Buddha has given us. This we don't see in any other religious system or any other spiritual system. This is unique presentation of Lord Buddha for the purification and development of the mind. Patimokha is not just a set of rules. It is the process of purification of the mind. It is a great help. It is a great aid that Lord Buddha has given us to progress on the path. Now this Patimokha, according to Theravada tradition, there are 227 rules, and these rules are to be followed and to be purified again and again. And this is done through what is called Uposatha. Uposatha is the procedure where these Patimokha rules are recited, and a bhikkhu is allowed to confess any violation of the rules. So, let me explain today this procedure of conducting this Uposatha. I come from Mahabodhi Society, Bangalore. We have a monastery. We are normally 15 to 18 bhikkhus and about 110 sramaneras. And sramaneras take precepts and forgiveness every day. The bhikkhus do this Patimokha every fortnight. So we get together every full moon day and new moon day and do this Uposatha in our Sima. We have Sima within our monastery, and there we do this. So the procedure is very, very clear. The procedure led by the Buddha is so clear and so enriching to us. The Patimokha is conducted either on the 14th day or 15th day or on the day in unity of monks. So these are the three occasions that Patimokkha can be conducted. And this has to be done only in the Sima. Yesterday, Venerable P.O. Bhaso explained elaborately about Sima. So this has to be done within the Sima limits, the boundary. The boundary is very much essential because the Sangha are together, and that also very close within the arm's length. It is not that monks are sitting somewhere here and there like that, but within the monks, within the arm's length. That shows the spirit of Sangha, that shows the spirit of togetherness, that shows the spirit of brotherliness. So, then there are three kinds of Patimokkha recitation. One is the full recitation, reciting all the 227 rules. And to do this, the minimum number is 4 or more. Otherwise, this full version of Patimokkha is not recited. So that is one way of holding the Uposatha. And the second one is called Parisuddhi, expression of purity. That is done if there are only 2 bhikkhus or 3 bhikkhus. So then they express their purity. And then there is the third method, that is adhitthana. If it is only 1 bhikkhu, all the rules cannot be recited, but for the sake of one's own purification, one will say that today I determine the Uposatha, so single bhikkhu. So we can see that the procedures are so important, and even in every situation, whether we are single or 2 or 3 or in more numbers, we can still work on our purification. Then, before the recitation of Patimokkha begins, there are some important preparations, and among them, one very important procedure is there, which is called Apatti Desana. Apatti Desana is confessing. This Apatti Desana is not necessarily done in the Sima, only on full moon days and new moon days. This can be done any number of times. Just 2 bhikkhus are enough, the senior and junior. The first junior confesses and then the senior one confesses. But this Apatti Desana is very simple but very profound spiritual practice, where the junior monk says, Aham bante sabhapatiyo arochayami. That means, I confess all my offenses. That shows the seriousness and the sincerity of the monk in his monkhood. The spiritual life is possible only when we are absolutely sincere. So when we really concern about ourselves. It is not about following some procedures or some rites and rituals. It is about sincere commitment to purify our own mind. Then we sincerely express our offenses, that we confess that I have done offense, so I express that in front of you. And then the senior monk asks, do you see these offenses? And then the junior monk says, Ama Bante Pasami, yes Bante, I see them. That means the realization, the understanding is there. It is an act of wisdom, because to see what is right and what is wrong correctly according to the reality is wisdom. So when we see kusala as kusala, akusala as akusala, wholesome as wholesome and unwholesome as unwholesome, that is already the beginning of wisdom. If we don't understand this very basic reality, then we will be in wrong views, taking wholesome as unwholesome and unwholesome as wholesome. So this important training is done by this Apatti Desana. And then the bhikkhu says, the senior bhikkhu says, restrain in future, restrain properly. And then the junior bhikkhu says, yes, Bante, I will restrain in future. And then the senior bhikkhu also confesses. What a wonderful system. Here, if somebody is senior, he is not beyond corrections. So even the senior bhikkhu says, look, Auso. Auso means the junior monk. Dear Auso, I also want to confess my faults. So we can see that the brotherhood within the Sangha becomes so strong when we trust each other totally and then confess to each other. So when we confess like this, then our mind becomes free of guilt and we can shed our burden of these faults and then start new life, new restraint, new control on the mind, and then our spiritual development happens. So coming to this Patimokkha, this Uposatha procedure itself, before that, after doing this Apatti Desana, one is purified and then one comes to the Sima. In the Sima, there are 9 prior requisites. That Sima has to be swept and kept very clean. In our Sangha, in the Lord Buddha's dispensation, cleanliness is our ultimate goal, cleaning our mind. So everywhere Lord Buddha has emphasized cleanliness. So the Sima has to be clean and lamps have to be put in place. The seats have to be arranged and water for drinking has to be arranged. Now these 4 preparations can be done by anybody, whoever knows the procedures, the duties of the bhikkhus, so they can prepare the Sima and other requisites. And then comes another important prior arrangement. That is, if there is any bhikkhu who is sick or who is not able to come and participate, so even that bhikkhu is not excluded. Even that bhikkhu is considered for the purification process. So that bhikkhu should give the consent. That bhikkhu says, I give you the consent, please take my consent to the Sangha and inform the Sangha that I am not able to come. So this is called Chanda. And then Parisuddhi, conveying Parisuddhi. So that bhikkhu not only gives his consent, but he also gives the purification. He also does the apatti desana, and then he tells another bhikkhu, please inform the Sangha about my purification. So like that, these two are concerned with the bhikkhu or bhikkhus who are not going to come to the Sima. Maybe they are sick, or maybe they are busy, or they are going out somewhere. So then they can give this consent and purification. And then there is, as the procedure begins, there is one questioner, bhikkhu, and then there is one replier. So the questioner, bhikkhu, recites, Sunatu me bhante sangho yadi sangha sapattakallang ahang ayasmantang so and so ittha namang vinayang puchayang. If the Sangha permits, I will ask so and so bhikkhu the Vinaya rules. I will request him to recite the Vinaya rules. And the other bhikkhu who is the reciter, he will also say, if it is the time, if the Sangha considers that it is right time, then I will reply the answers and recite the Patimokkha. So, as yesterday it was told, that in every Sangha Kamma, in the beginning, it is very clearly declared, and the permission of the Sangha is taken. It is consensus. That means togetherness. Together, everybody is agreeing for some procedure to take place. So this is very, very important, and it shows how Lord Buddha made every member of the Sangha responsible for any proceedings that happen. So then there is this question answer procedure. Then it is asked whether the sweeping is done, whether lamps are lighted, whether drinking water and seats are arranged, which are called preliminary duties are done. Then preparation duties are done, that is announcing the season. So every Uposatha, the season has to be announced. In the Buddha Shasana, there are 3 seasons: winter, rainy season, and summer. These 3. So each season consists of 4 months. So that season is announced, and after the season, the Uposatha number is also announced. So in 4 months, normally there are 8 Uposatha days, full moon and new moon. But sometimes it is 10 Uposathas. So the announcement is made. This is the summer season or winter season, And this season consists of 8 Uposathas or 10 Uposathas. And among these 8 Uposathas, already 3 have passed. This is the 4th one, and the other 4 are left. So it means so specific, very specific date and the time is announced about conducting this Uposatha. It is so beautiful. If we look at the procedure, what a precise system has been formulated. And then there is counting of the bhikkhus. The number of bhikkhus is counted and it is announced. In this Sima hall, there are 10 bhikkhus, 12 bhikkhus, and they are all gathered here within the arm's length. And then there is one more question, whether bhikkhunis have been instructed. In earlier times, there were bhikkhunis, so bhikkhunis also used to come and request bhikkhus for the instruction, for the teachings. But nowadays, there are no bhikkhunis. So normally, the answer is, since the bhikkhunis are absent now, this instruction is not given. So all these preparatory duties are first conducted. And then one more important question is asked. That is, about the people who should be excluded. Then, are there no persons here who should be excluded? The question is asked. 21 kinds of persons cannot be present in the Sima when this Uposatha is conducted. And let me tell you who are these 21 persons. Gahata, that means layman or laywoman. Bhikkhuni or Sikha Pachataka, that is one who has disposed the trainings. Sorry. That is somebody who has committed parajika, or the Samanera or Samaneri, or Sikhamana, one who is under the instruction. And then Antima Vattuja, one who has committed parajika offense. The earlier one is one who has given up the vows. And then Apatya Adasane, one who is suspended because he is not seeing the offenses. And one who is suspended for not confessing the offenses. And one who is suspended for not giving up a wrongdoing. And then a eunuch. Then there is one who has entered the Sangha in a stealthy way. One who has gone over to a sect. That means he believes with other wrong views. And animal should not be there. And then some very heinous criminals should not be there. That is, one who has killed the mother, or one who has killed the father, one who has killed an arahant, or one who has harmed the Buddha, or one who has created division in the Sangha. These are heinous crimes, and person who has committed should not be there. And then one who has who seduces the nuns, that person should not be there. And one who is both male and female, bisexual person. So these are 21 kinds of persons who cannot be present in the Sima while this Uposatha is conducted. Then comes another very important announcement, that is, then the questioner tells, if the Sangha permits, I now request the bhikkhu to recite the Patimokkha rules. And then the bhikkhu starts reciting the Patimokkha rules. The first part, when he recites, is that the preliminary duties and preparatory duties are all done, and now listen carefully, and then he announces what is so important statement. He says, should anyone have committed a fault, let him declare it. If he has not committed fault, then let him keep silent. So that is the method of expressing. And when the bhikkhus are silent, then it is known that they are pure. And when the Patimokkha is proclaimed 3 times in such assembly, who fails to declare an actual fault on remembering it is guilty of false speech in full awareness. So this is very important. It is, the faults should not be hidden. And if somebody doesn't declare, then it amounts to false speech, lying. And this bhikkhu reminds all the Sangha that any kind of lying is false speech in full awareness has been pronounced by the Exalted One to be a thing obstructive to progress. So Lord Buddha has said, the false speech, the lying, is obstruction. That is obstruction to the progress. So it is not just recitation of some rules. It is out of compassion that Lord Buddha has given us this procedure. How to remove these obstructions, that is the procedure. So that's why it is said, please open up with your faults, don't hide. So actual fault should be declared by a bhikkhu who remembers to have committed it and who looks for purification. To have declared it is for his good. So this is the warning. We can consider it as warning or the clarification before the actual recitation of the rules. There are, according to Theravada Patimokkha, there are 4 Parajikas which are first recited, then 13 Sangadisesha, and then 2 Aniyata, then 30 Nisagya Pachitya, 92 Pachitya, 4 Patidesaniya, and 75 Sekhyas, 7 Adhikarana Samatha. So out of compassion, Lord Buddha has given these different levels of faults and violations. Of course, the 4 Parajikas means one is excommunicated. That person cannot be a bhikkhu. But all others are corrigible, and including the the Adhikarana Samatha, the last part, how the rules have to be settled and how a bhikkhu has to be warned and reprimanded. So, like this, we recite all the 227, and at the end, all the bhikkhus together, after the completion, we also recite one sutra, Karniya Metta Sutta or Samsutta, and that gives such immense freedom within, and then it gives such great brotherliness with the Sangha and such great feeling of protection that even if I am going astray, there is this Sangha which really protects us, helps us. So that kind of feeling comes, and then we can purify again. So before I conclude, let me remind everybody here why Lord Buddha has given the Patimokkha rules. He specifically explains the 10 rules for the welfare of the Sangha, number 1, for the comfort of the Sangha, number 2, for the control of the uncontrolled people, for the comfort of the well-behaved bhikkhus, for the restraining of the pollutions, ashravas, in the present life, for guarding pollutions liable to arise in a future life, for the increase of devotion, pleasing of those not at please. That means if we live in good rules, people looking at us will develop devotion. And for increase in those who are pleased already, and for establishing true Dhamma, and for the benefit of the Vinaya. So these are the 10 rules that Lord Buddha has given. So here I conclude. I am very, very grateful to everybody and Professor Shastriji. And I am always with you for now and in future. We will together work with such conferences. We have to do more on Vinaya so that people are more and more aware and sensitized, both monks and lay people. We should tell the lay people that which are related to them. Our rules, we have to tell them, for example, offering of food, how they give food, offering of requisites. So like that, we have to sensitize the people. And today, as our Professor Shastriji said, we lost one of our very good upasakas. For 50 years he served Mahabodhi. He is dead, and I have to go there for his cremation. So with lot of thanks to everybody, I take permission.
Sadhu, sadhu. Thank you very much, Bhante. It was a very enlightening, talk on the Uposatha, and very much similar to us, and sharing us from the perspective of the Theravada tradition. I really today feel that you have to go earlier to perform the duties of your very old worker who has passed away. And we are always with you, and you are all sorts of prayers for the dead, and who have also remained with his family members, and that he may attain Nibbana soon. And we are also a little bit sad that we did earlier, because for your questioning and all that has remained, but I fear Vasa and all Bhantes would be also happy to share if any question comes or comment comes, then they are in your place, they will just give their comments and answers. Thank you very much for again for the presentation. Now, second, speakers. The first speaker is Dr. Bhikkhu Bodhipala. His paper is on Chivaravathu. Dijel tanda Madurai nengi duazamba Bhikkhu Bodhipala 정죽 종대 아니 공기 좀시디 아니 거기 시리자 저선 디기 권나다 권나 송시나이 so I request Bhante to present his paper on Jivarvatu.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
Just a gift from the abbot to Anand Bhante and to Bhante Sevili for Thanksgiving. We are coming from and participating in the second International Vinaya Conference. And Bhante Sevili Thero, the head of the Mahabodhi Society, Sarnath. And he is very happy that he could come here personally. And although there's a little bit obscuration, because again, some of his members, Sangha is not well, so he will go and attend those things. And he feels that he was quite happy and have to leave now with Bhante Ananda. So we bid farewell to them and have a good, safe journey back to Sarnath and to Bangalore.
Very near to my mouth, I think.
So now ask Bhante Bhikkhu Bodhipala Madurai to present his paper on Jivarvastu.
Thanks. Professor Dr. Yeshi, the chief organizer of the conference. Professor Shastriji, senior venerables, and all the venerables of all denominations. Thank you very much for me presenting this paper. First I start from a Pali words. Whether a monk or a nun, wear this chivara not to beautifying my body, only to word of cold, to word of heat, to word of touch of venomous insects, snakes, spiders, centipedes, scorpions, and wind, sun and reptiles, and only keeping myself decent. It is told in Majjhima Nikaya. The purpose of wearing robe should be understood by the monk. Because due to time constraint, I will be moving here and there. The special features of Buddhist clergy robe. We cannot use the term either. The correct term for the Buddhist monk is the correct word. If you use the word clergy, it will be like in another religious sects. So, the special features of Buddhist clergy robe, number one, it is not just like a uniform for executing one's job either in an office or in an industry. It is not a uniform. Sorry. It is not ritualistic attire specially worn to perform some religious rites. Number three, it should be worn by the monks throughout the life. Very, very important, throughout the life. If a monk discards his robe, practically it is disrobing. The individual loses his rank in sacerdotal age, life in a monastery. Sacerdotal age means counting the Vasana Kala, Varshavasa. If I disrobe, I lose my rank. I cannot claim that I have passed such and such rules. If he again wears himself, if not allowed by monks, If he wants again to wear, he should follow procedure as explained before. The first speaker, Venerable Ananda, explained. But his sacerdotal age will be usually forming the day of second ordination. It is not like a sign just to denote that he is a special person. Don't think that he is a special person. For claiming that we are a special person, we are not wearing the robe. Okay. But he has to adapt certain monastic rules, then the lay page. Number 6, a monk should not wear the robe just to beautify himself from others. In Pali, it is called Chivara Sulomanas, which means just to pleasing the mind. Don't use the wear the robe, just pleasing our mind. Now I will come from the beginning. Clergies, priests, monks, yogis, recluses, whoever he may be, so clergies, priests, monks, yogis, recluses, he may be, in all the religion of the world, he wears a different type of attire in order to differentiate from the others of other religion or in his own religion itself. The purpose is not to just to differentiate, but due to also to fulfill some part of religious rites. All such special attires have their names. Some clergies wear permanently after their ordination, lifelong. The other type of religious people wears as a uniform while performing religious rites. Is it working? As far as Buddhist monk is concerned, he has to wear the robe technically called in Pali and Sanskrit Chivara lifelong. Evolution of religious dress code. According to Hindu tradition, the Lord Shiva wears hides of two animals, tiger and elephant. In ancient India, all yogis and ascetics wore different type of attires made up of animal hides, feathers of wild fowls, such as owl and hawks, etc. Then dried up leaves, even seeds of tree barks and trunks or yarns made up of tree trunks, fibers, etc. So I want to leap up all the Semitic religious code because time restricts. Okay. The evolution of Buddhist clergy dress. According to traditional belief, it is that when the prince Siddhartha renounced the world by cutting himself his locks and giving up his royal attires and ornaments, a Brahma of the celestial world offered him a set of ascetic attire, technically called Ashtaparikara. Ashtaparikara means there are 8 items, Ashta means 8, but this is later development, but which contains majorly 3 types of clothes called upper garment, Uttarasanga, inner garment, Andaravasaka, and minor cloth can be used as bathing towel, Snanakata. Finally, a major double robe technically called Sangati. And it may be later development in the monastic system, especially when the candidate seeking for higher ordination, it is questioned by the ordinating group whether the monk has Sangati or not. The monks who have been given higher ordination should possess as one of the basic requirements for such ordination. The other tradition claims that the Buddha used to visit cemetery grounds. This is the reality. The first color of the robe is yellow. Why it is yellow? The Buddha used to visit the cemeteries where he can collect yellow robe. In the ancient India, before cremating or burying a dead body, they used to cover in yellow color robe, cloths. Buddha straight away went to all the cemetery and then collected the yellow cloths, stitched, and it made a long robe. At least its length was 9 feet, the breadth was 6 feet. This is the real color of the. Yesterday there was a question that why there are different type of colors. I will be giving the answer, but Buddha's color was yellow. Okay. The Buddha collected and attached such clothes. What he collected made long and widened piece for multiple purpose, using for covering his body, protecting from sun, rain, cold, especially from venomous insects like spider, fly, centipedes, etc. This was technically called Pangsakula. Pangsakula means going to the cemetery and collecting the cloths. Buddha never preferred yellow color. He has no any preference regarding color. In cemetery, he can collect only yellow color cloths. He used as his own. So, the explanation and difference of the following robes. Antarvasaka. This is an inner garment covering the inner body, at least from the waist or the navel point, rounding the entire waist up to the ankle. Almost entirely covers the torso. In many images of the Buddha, the bottom of Antarvasaka usually protrudes. More or less, it is in the size of the modern lungi or sarang. Uttarasanga. It is a long robe measuring at least minimum 9 feet in length and at least 6 feet in width, which can cover the entire body, even the Antarvasaka. But Uttarasanga is also not visible when the monks cover his body with Sankati. Sankati, this is an outer robe covering the body than Uttarasanga, used for various occasions. It comes over the upper robe Uttarasanga and the inner garment Antarvasaka. In all Buddha images, Sankati is most visible robe. Due to its length and width, it is quite similar in shape to the Greek and Roman cloak. With the Sankati or the Uttarasanga, it is a similar form of Roman cloak, what the Roman military officials they used. In shape, it has been used as Greco-Buddhist art of Gandhara. The 3 robes in one set called Trichivara. Buddhist monks' clothing technical terms. The Sanskrit term Kasaya, the Pali term Asava, the Chinese term Jasha, Japanese term Kesa, Korean term Gese, Vietnamese term Chase, and finally Tibetan term Jogu. Am I correct? Jogu, Chogu. But in Sanskrit and Pali, a common name is used Chivara, thus to denote monk's attire or robe. Further development of Chivara was when the number of monks increased, the Buddha made a pattern of robe similar to the appearance of paddy fields. When the Buddha claimed the Grijakuda, Kirtrakuda in Pali, Rajagriha, the capital city of Magadha, he witnessed the paddy field with multitudes of squared lands from the top of the mountain. He suggested that robe of the monks may be made similar to paddy fields, with square pieces of cloth. From that time, robe is made of small squares of cloth in many numbers, starting from 18, 22, even up to the number of 1,000. See, one monk from Vietnam, he wears a robe having 1,000 pieces. Suppose take the measurement. If we take 9 feet, approximately it is 3 meters. The length of the robe is 3 meters. The width 600 feet, 2 meters. So there are 60,000 square centimeters. Out of that 60,000 centimeters, that monk used 64 centimeters, square centimeters. He attached 1,000 pieces in his robe. We asked whether you collected from Pangsakula. That is the problem. No, I went to textile shop, purchased the clothes, and then cutting into 1,000 pieces. This is ridiculous thing. When a rule is enacted, when a Vinaya is enacted, it will be ridiculous thing. For example, take in Bodh Gaya, the name of Pindapada. Some monks take their own car, go into the village, stop the car, go and beg, get their alms, again they come to the car, then come to the monastery, not eating that food given to the workers. Be careful. When we enact the Vinaya, it will be a ridiculous thing. Like that monk went to his textile shop, purchasing the cloth, making 1,000 pieces, and then attaching. We can appreciate him that taking too much strain to attach the 1,000 pieces. That we can appreciate. The purpose is, the Buddha's purpose is go to the cemetery and collect the wastage clothes. Don't think about color. It can be multiple colors, not only yellow. Any piece of clothes, what you get, you can attach with your length. It make a long robe, can be used as Uttara Sangha. Chivara pattern according to denominations. Though there are two major denominations in Buddhism called Mahayana and Theravada, many subsets are functioning and they attend to their own pattern of robes according to culture, suited to even climatic conditions, etc. Traditional robes for nuns in Buddhist order. In addition to monk's code of dress, the Vinaya rules of nun order insist to use some other clothes and garments such as vest or bodies, Sangachika. Technical term is Sangachika. It's like a modern body and should have a bathing cloth, Uddaka Kastika. Uddaka Kastika means bathing towel, which altogether comprise of a nun 5-fold robes. 3 Uttara Sangha, Andravasaka, Sankati, Sankishika, and Uddakastika. Making of Sivara, the robes. As mentioned earlier, the Buddha collected Pangsakula from cemetery grounds, and due to increase in the number of monks, making of robe technology started. All robes were handmade in the beginning, and the monks took responsibilities for making the robes, guiding the laities, upasakas, when monks are confined in the monastery due to rainy retreat, Vasanakala. According to Pali tradition, 6 kinds of clothes are allowed for making a robe, either for a nun or for a monk. Plant fibers, cotton wigs or threads, silk, animal hairs, hemp or mixture of such some or all of them were allowed to make the robe. But silk and hairs were allowed by the Buddha himself for making chivaras. That should be put in research whether Buddha allowed silk. Silk is the embodiment of killing of all that forms. I think Buddha never allowed. Maybe some interpretations, wrong interpolations in the scriptures. But the Buddha recommended that robe design should be cut in the pattern of Magadha party fields. That is too would be later development. When the Buddha collected cemetery clothes and he himself made a long robe in the early time, obviously the pattern would not be paddy field. It may be irregular pattern. In the cemetery, he may collect irregular cloths and then attach to making a long robe. It could not be the squares or the rectangles. Color of the robes. Yesterday there was a question. When we talk about religious attires, whatever the religion may be, there are two major things which should be well concerned. The first one is the pattern and outlook of such government, and the second very important one is color. Because the very color quickly discern the truth that what type of clergyman is, religion, sect, subject, even the rank of the clergy such as pastor, bishop, and archbishop, so on. In Buddhism, according to Theravada tradition, monks have been categorized into two groups. The first one is called Vipassana Dura. This type of monks are like yogis of Hinduism and leading the life of solitude, either living in the forest or caves. And they are much interested in teaching and practicing of Buddhist system of meditation, that is especially Vipassana and Samatha Bhavana. The monastic rules give some exemption to such monks, that they need not shave the beard and head. For Vipassana Dura, those who are living in the forest, they need not shave the head and beard. They can leave it as it is. The monastic rules give some exemptions, such as sanction that need not to shave the beard and head, as they do live in the solitude, not much mingling with the laities, the upasakas. And the dress code is so liberal, but Tritivara is a must. The second type of monks is called Grantha Duras. Grantha means scriptures. This type of monks mostly concerned with a religious book called Tripitaka, imbibing their teachings and reciting them before laities such as Mahamangala Sutta, Metta Sutta, Jayamangala Sutta, Jayamangala Attakada, according to the need of special occasion, and preaching Buddhism. And shortly speaking, a Grantha Dura is either a priest or a clergy, practically speaking, doing a bread-winning job, eventually leading parasitic life. These type of monks are very seriously concerned with their external appearance and much concerned with robe. They wear its color, mode of wearing, for example, parimandal. It is covering entire body, by which the upper robe would round up the neck and hang from there and down in triangle, even covering the inner garment. Monastic system and sect, their color code. Obviously, in the beginning, during the Buddha's time, there were no sects and no need of preferring colors for the robe. In Dhammapada, Buddha mentions very clearly that yellow robe, just wearing a yellow robe, one cannot claim that he is a monk. He uses the term correctly, yellow. So obviously, during Buddha's time, the color would be yellow color. As it was mentioned earlier, that Pangsakula, the scattered clothes in cemetery grounds, were attached and made a long robe measuring at least 9 feet, and according to practice, the color was yellow. But in Buddhism, also sects and subsects were coming up. This made a sea change in monastic life, making its impacts in every aspect, including traditional robe also. In India, the variation of robe distinguished different type of sects. These represented the different schools that they belonged to, and their robes, mode of wearing finally wearing colored robe. During the period 148 AD to 170 AD, the Parthian monk, my pronunciation may be wrong, An Xiaoguo came to China and translated a book called Da Bikyo Sankyon Wei, I may be wrong in the accent, which describes the color pattern of certain monasteries. Another text translated during later period entitled Sariputra Paripracha. The text name is Sariputra Paripracha, describing about the color pattern of robes for 5 major schools as follows. Sorry. Sarvastivada, deep red. Sariputra Paripracha says black. Dharmagupta, black. But Sariputra Paripracha says deep red. Mahasangika, yellow and the same yellow. Mahisaka, blue. Kashyapya, magnolia and magnolia. In tradition of Tibetan monastic system, which follows the school Mula Sarvastivada, red robes are regarded as characteristic of particular monastic school Mula Sarvastivada. Now, coloring method. The dyeing is allowed to be obtained from 6 kinds of raw material such as roots, plants, bark, leaves, flowers, and fruit extracts. The color is extracted by various methods: boiling, squeezing, smashing by another log, soaking in the trunk, seeds in the water for the days, and so on. By these ways, extracts are collected. Generally, as raw material is cotton, pick for making the robe, the undyed robe would be always white. These extracts are applied on the white robe and got the desired color. Generally, jackfruit's bark or trunk is used for extracting yellow color. Likewise, neem tree is taken for making red color. Methods of wearing. There are a number of ways of wearing a robe by a Buddhist monk. Generally, within the monastery or in the inside, and when having audience with a most senior monastic member, a simple way is adopted denoting the respect to the elder. The right side up is pushed down below to the armpit and over the robe on the left shoulder, by this leaving the right shoulder. In special religious ceremonies, public meeting, especially going around for alms in the streets, the most universal that the 2 top comes of Uttara Sangha are held together parallelly and the edges rolled tightly together. The roll is then pushed down with the left arm. The roll is parted in front which towards the right arm. This method is adopted almost in all Theravada countries. So robe offering ceremony was yesterday well elaborately discussed. So I want to leave it. Making of robes in modern days. In Myanmar, robe making industry is one of the major industries. There are hundreds of tailors getting employment opportunities. But everything is automatized. Due to this, pious handmade spiritual strife is lacking, and sacrament of robe is ignored, as weaving and machine stitching involved for making a robe. In ancient India, Buddhist ladies took hardship for making the robe to offer the monks when they finishing rainy retreat. During rainy season, all monks are confined in the monastery. Right from weaving to dyeing, every phase of making was taken much care and all handmade. All the works were totally handmade. Different type of additional attires than usual robe. In Southeastern Asian countries, Mahayana monks wear different cloaks and cassocks like a Christian priest. Even the upper robe is not used. Here they are using upper robe. Some Chinese monks, they are not using upper robe. Uttar Sangha is not available. In modern Theravada Buddhist countries, a special dress like modern banyan used in the name of Amsakota, which would expose full right arm only. In modern India, each monk has his own dress code in the name of Tivara. Practically, a full hand shirt is worn with round collar like a Christian clergy, and it is covered by Uttar Sangha and Sangat. The waistband which ties the Andrabhasaka also has its modern evolution, which was purely a cotton-made band measuring the width of 3 fingers and in length 4 feet without any metallic apertures. But today, it has all metallic components for dressing like that is buckles are used. It's also against Vinaya. So special, I already told, what's the time? Okay. So I think let me conclude. It will be not an exaggeration saying that Buddhist monastic system is one of the oldest community living system of monks who are in a group pursuing spiritual quest. As such, much care was taken about the attire and the various implications. The monastic robe is a versatile that can be used beside what are already explained, mentioned as a blanket, as a seat spread, a ground spread or sheet or head cover. It is perhaps the oldest style of dress still in use even passing of 2,600 years. Thank you very much.
Bodhipala, thank you for your presentation. And also he has raised some questions, about the silk use of those things. And also in our modern times, the using of sleeves and all those, are they according to Vinaya or not? And I think it will come up in the discussions. And now I invite Bhikkhu Ganaratana, Associate Professor, Department Pali, University of Chittagong, to present his paper, Theravada Vinaya, a survey of theory and practice in Bangladesh. So I just request Bhante to proceed his paper presentation.
Hello. Bahu satchancha sippancha vinayo cha susikito subhasita chaya vacha etang mangalamuttamang. I pay respect to the Threefold Gems. I'm paying respect to the abbot of Siraje Monastery. I also extension my respect to the chief guest from Taiwan, and also gratitude to Professor Dr. Loksa Norbu Shastri to invite me here have a presentation. I should make a little bit omitment that the title is about the Theravada Vinaya, a survey of theory and practice in Bangladesh. Please try to omit in Bangladesh. Just the title will be Theravada Vinaya, a survey of theory and practice. This article, I think, is quite big. It's already 37 pages. I just gave a little bit abstract only. So in the abstract, if we try to read out the first 2 passages, maybe we can see the importance of Vinaya. Before that, I already recited verses from 38
blessing we call the Mangala Sutta. They are explained about to learn different scripture, to learn different art and archaeology, will learn about the Vinaya, and will verse about the speech. These four kind of already explained in the Mangala Sutta. So Seraje Monastic University is doing these four noble deeds. Today, the conference is about the Vinaya, which already mentioned within these four blessings. In the Vinaya Pitaka, we can see that Wait Sariputra, wait. The Tathagata will know the right time. The teacher will not prescribe any rule to his pupil. He will not recite the Patimokkha as long as no factors leading to defilement appear in the order. This is the answer of the Buddha to Sariputra, worries that harm may be done to the order. If no rules of conduct are prescribed in time. And Sariputra further points out that the Buddhas past neglected this very duty would destroy us result. Their teachings suffer a quick decay and an early disappearance. This is from Vinaya Pitaka, where they mention that in the very early period of the Buddha's time, there are no Vinaya rules and regulations. When there are some defilement appear in the order, then the Vinaya comes to forward for ruling the order. This passage underlines three important points. The first, the significance of Buddhist monastic law. For without Vinaya, there is no order, and without the community of monks, there is no Buddhism. Consequently, the Vinaya texts are the last one lost when Buddhism eventually disappears. Secondly, the rules of conduct must be promulgated by the Buddha himself. He is the only lawgiver, and thus all rules to which every single monk has to obey are taught to go back to the Buddha. The third point is that the rules are prescribed only after an offense has been committed. Thus, rules are derived from experience and based on the practical need to avoid certain forms of behavior in future. This means at the same time that the cause for a rule is always due to the wrong behavior of a certain person, and consequently there is no existent system of Buddhist law. This 3 point is, I think, very important. Though the 4 scholars from different parts who already presented their article is also related with the Vinaya. In the morning, Venerable Ananda also explained about the Upasata, which is also related to the Patimokkha. My discussion also will be among those points. These 3 points which I had been explained, I think this is also a question for the modern scholar. Try to explain about the Patimokkha which Venerable Ananda mentioned. The Patimokkha contains 227 rules in the Theravada tradition and slightly different numbers in order to extend Vinaya tradition. These rules are arranged according to the gravity of the respective offense. A transgression of any of the first four rules leads to the irrevocable expulsion from the order. This is why these rules are called parajika, relating to expulsion. The first three rules deals with the branch of chastity, with stealing, taking what has not been given, and murder, perspectively. These are immediately obvious offenses which one might find in a law court. The fourth and last one of this group, on the other hand, needs some explication. It deals with monks who make the false claim to possess supernatural power. At first glance, it might seem rather surprising that this claim could result in the expulsion from the order. This draws attention to the high importance given to meditative practice, which according to the belief of the time of early Buddhism, would ultimately lead to the acquisition of supernatural magical power. Obviously, some safeguard was needed against false ascetics in the order, who might do considerable damage to the Buddhist order by shaking the faith of the lay community on which the Buddhists depend. While the name given to the first group of offenses is easily understood, the designation of the second group, comprising 13 offenses called Sanghadisesa, has been discussed repeatedly without any convincing result so far. According to the Theravada exegetical tradition, the word means an offense which is noted by shaking the order at the beginning and the end. This tentative etymological translation, which would not be possible on the basis of the form of the name as used in other Vinaya schools, means that the length of punishment, which is a temporary expulsion from the order, has to be determined by the assembly of monks. Though the patient procedure has been described at great length in the later part of the Vinaya, it is not fully understood in every detail as yet. Again, the first 5 offenses relate to sexual misbehavior: losing semen otherwise than while sleeping, touching a woman, making a sexual remark, trying to seduce a woman, or acting as a mace maker. The next offense, Sanghadisesa 6 and 7, concern the compound for building either a cell for a single monk or a great monastery. This has to be commissioned by the order. The construction of the building itself is the topics of a later rule, Pachitya 19. The rules Sanghadisesa 8 and 12 relate to inner conflicts of the order. Among them is the famous one of splitting the order, Sanghadisesa 10. The last rule regulates certain misbehavior of monks toward laymen. Both offenses of the third group, called undermined or aniyata, relates to sexual behavior of a monk who stayed together with a woman either in an open place or under one roof. Depending on his action, he may be reliable to Parajika 1. Sanghadisesa 2 and 5 of Pachitya, it is really interesting that the monk is considered guilty if a trustworthy laywoman, who is the very woman involved, accuse him. Following the Patimokkha, no further evidence is needed. The early commentary, however, the Sutta Vibhanga, adds that it is necessary too that the monk does not deny having committed the respective offense. Here we found one of the basic principles of early Buddhist law as laid down in the Patimokkha, that the monk involved has to admit his intention to commit and offense. Consequently, the normal standard of the monks are supposed to be very high. Speaking the truth is taken more or less for granted here as a Brahminical tradition, where it is thought that Brahmins speak the truth by their very nature, given the high esteem to truth necessarily found in oral culture, such as early Buddhism or that of Veda. It is surprising that telling a lie is considered only as a pachitya offense. The fourth group of offense, comprising the largest number, altogether 122, divided into two groups: 30 rule concerning expiation by giving up, nisagya pasitya, and 92 rules called pure expiation by Suddha Pasitya, because some monastic punishment is imposed. The 30 Nisagya rules are the particularly interested as they shed some light of the property a monk was allowed to hold. These rules concerning property are divided into three sets of the 10 rules. The first deals with robes, the second with mats and materials used by make them, and includes the important nisagya providing trade and possession of any gold or silver, to which the Sutta Vibhanga gives a precise explanation of whatever is used, thus including even paper money, if not credit cards. In spite of these rules, monks did own the financial means even to build monastery at their own expenses. As it is said in the commentary to Pachitya 19, it is not clear from the Vinaya Pitaka how this was handled. Probably a layman attached to the monasteries managed the finance owned by the monk. This rule is one, if not the earliest reference to riches in the possession of individual monks. At the time of Samantabhasadika, it was usual that monks control their financial means. This is shown by his liability to pay damage in case any property belonging to the order was lost through his negligence. The third and last set of 10 Nisagya deals with the alms bowl and miscellaneous items such as medicine or the forbidden appropriation of this given to the whole Sangha by an individual monks. The pure or Pachitya comprised 92 rules in the Theravada Patimokkha and 90 in the Sarvastivadya Patimokkha Sutra. The later number seems to be original one, for a few Pachitya have been split into two rules by the Theravadin or are counted in such a way, giving rise to some doubt about their originality. The initiate arrangement of the rules in groups of 10 has thus been obscured somewhere. The groups themselves are named after the first rules in the group. The consequence of transgression and pasitya are not clear. The name of these offense, which has been borrowed from Vedic ritual languages, point to some kind of atonement, but no further detail seems to be given in the legal text of Theravada. It may be sufficient to mention only a few of these offenses as example. The very first rules concern telling lies, and therefore is again one of the universal rules like parajika. Here again, the Buddhist law is near to concern of the Veda. For the Vedic Dharma Sutra, it is the same. Even the formulation of this Pachitya shows that has been taken over by the Buddhists from some earlier source, because in the state of the typical Buddhist wording, for which there is no correspondence in the Vedic literature, if a monk should do this or that, a different formula is applied here. If there is a conscious lie, it is an offense requiring expiation. At the same time, this wording is much simpler than the usually very careful, if at times some word clumsy formulation of the rules in Patimokkha, whatever monk should intentionally describe a being of the class human of life, or should seek somebody who bring the knife to him, or should price that, or should incite to that saying, "Hello, there my man, of what use you is this life, is this evil, difficult life, that is better for you than life," or should deliberately and purposefully in various ways price death, or should incite anyone to death. He is also reliable to expulsion and not to communion. Parajika third. Obviously, this is an attempt to describe all possible conditions leading to a certain offense in a very comprehensive way. The struggle with the language and certain awareness of the syntax underline the fact that the author are not accustomed to this kind of regal formulation when they attempted to achieve something new and innovative in the history of Indian law. The rules laid down in the Patimokkha seems to be the first attempt at the truly legal description of the fact in India. It is only the Pachitya that violating living being other than man is referred to. Pachitya 11 concerning plant, and much later the Pachitya animal and mention. In contrast to murder, both these offenses do not result in expulsion from the order, not even to a temporary suspension of the right of a monk, as does a Sangatisesa offense. This underlines the superior position held by man, who is considered to stand high above any other living being. This remarkable feature of Buddhist anthropology is also mirrored by the Dhamma. Only men are able to become Buddha. The last rule to be mentioned for this group is Pachitya 19, concerning the erection of a monastery, already referred to above the connection with Sangatisesa 6 and 7. This example suggested that rules of once included into the Patimokkha can never be dropped. The building described here seems to be a very simple, if not primitive, type of monastery. As soon as the monasteries developed into larger complex, it became impossible to follow or even use these rules any longer. As a consequence, the exact meaning seems to have been forgotten by soon. Already at the time when the old commentary, the Sutta Vibhanga, was formulated, because the explanation given here clearly showed that many details were no longer fully understood. The same fact can be deduced from the attempt to create a comprehensive text by reformatting the rules, as did some those schools who use Sanskrit in their Patimokkha Sutra. However, the exact meaning of these rules remaining obscure. Although evidently absolute for the long period, perhaps even for more than 2 millennia, these rules has been kept because it was considered impossible to change the after the Patimokkha promulgated by the Buddha himself. For it is impossible to reverse the Patimokkha Sutta. This opinion cannot be prevailed at all time, because the Patimokkha as we have it today must have been formulated by the order at an early date and not by the Buddha. Very soon, However, in the history of Buddhism, the assembly of monks decided not to touch the text anymore. The refusal of the change, even the minor rules, hidden at the position discussed at the Council of Rajagaha, could indicate the end of the freedom for any change of the Patimokkha. A set of only 4 rules follows this large group, as these offenses have to be pointed out only by the monks who has committed them. They are named Patidesaniya, pertaining to confession. I think the time is going to finish. Maybe I have to go in the end. According to the Theravada tradition, the first 2 Pitaka were recited and thus recognized as canonical at the first council immediately after the death of the Buddha, when Mahakassapa, as the leading monk, asked Upali, the most learned monks in Vinaya, to recite the text comprising Buddhist law. He did so by inquiring about the place and about the topics of the rule. These 3 points, which constitute the introductory story to a rule and also designated as the whole as Bhattu, topics or introductory matters in the commentary. These stories have been invited much later than the rules proper are formulated, for they are at times based on Go's misunderstanding of the content of the given prescription. In contrast to the account of the first council, the Samanta Pasadika, which does not know Anupanati as a separate entry in the division of the Sutta Vibhanga, next mentioned to the commentary explaining individual word. This is the technical term for the explanation of the Patimokkha found in the Sutta Vibhanga, based on a way of legal thinking much more developed than in the Patimokkha proper. Therefore, it seems rather significant that no mention is made of this part of the Sutta Vibhanga in the account of the first council, since this might indicate that this account dates back to a time when the Padabhajaniya did not yet exist. Let me conclude. All this rich, hardly explored history of the law, quite different and independent from Hindu Dharmasastra, is at the same time a considerable intellectual achievement of the Indian culture. Only in the very recent past, the first step to understand or even to discover the elaborate system that seems to underline in the Buddhist legal texts have been taken. This aspect has not been touched in the present discussion, which try to concentrate only on the Theravada legal tradition, leaving aside the Vinaya or other school, which at least as far as the Mula Sarvastivadian are concerned, have an equal rich heritage of texts mainly preserved in Tibet. Once all these will have been thoroughly researched, Buddhist and perhaps particularly Theravada Vinaya must stand as a major Indian contribution to culture and in general. Today, usually Indian indigenous grammar is treated and Panini quoted. Brahmagupta is named in the field of mathematics, law, legal literature, and judicial training of the Buddhists are passed over the quite unjustified silence in this context. Even in a purely Indian context, for the slim but highly stimulating volume contributed by the JDM direct to the history of Indian literature or to the handbook of Orientalist Buddhist law in omitted and the Vinaya as the law book is well hidden in the volume of the history of Indian literature on Pali literature. This will certainly change once the system of Buddhist monks' law is understood, and it can be achieved only by the comprehensive investigation, first of all, into the legal terminology, which is the key to understand the development and history of Buddhist monks' law. Thank you very much.
For your excellent presentation. And now it's time for tea break. And so then after that we have a mind-blowing sort of session. And Bhante has also raised some questions about the, some Vedic maybe have cracked in those things. However, Dharma Vinaya is a supreme one. If the real symbol, whether Buddha Dharma is surviving or not. So it is very important issue. The Dharma Vinaya is the most important in this 21st century, is to see whether Buddha Dharma truly exists, depends on the Dharma Vinaya of existing or not. Thank you very much. Discussion and question and answer. That detail at the Nede Kundusumgi, Yanangadu, any Sogdingi, Tangbunangi, any Kuigishi, any Sojongishi, any Chittagongdan, Bangladesh, Nalola, any Nede Pakwan Nede Bedege, Nedang, any Tubegi Chaksha, Kandijavaji, that Madrugi, any Toning di Nangola, just to watch it. That is Jella, Kasan Shivanashi, any Chiwatangi, any Tordu Tang, Yanti Dola session and get the Tordu Tony, any Smurochi, any Lota Vekite, and Jugure, and Dijela, Pronouncegita, Ningita, any Bante. Anan Bante Peo Martina, that he Sojung Gishire, and make it a Kingu or a Konosu Pejin, Tochena.
Tanda ni kandishiya didi tanda tano tombo sunshi no ni kon sunshi kor kandishi chawaji di shudin rigri sundu. Di tanda ni kandishiya di karayin sena tanda sonji soda gando sunsu kote. Tanda tanji eba me dewa lula leja kya tang ani neden dewa lula shaziki sene watan richini. Dewa susu lolo soda ndo sonde ke mandra susu kone suna dewa shiono dende chisa dewa re de ndita tangji yeba me dewa lolo ane soda ndo sonde inje meni ane leja ke tola son matewa ina de kanda chaga yore entaga nangshin dewa susu so dena neden dewa lolo dandi nega soda ndo sonde 네 샤즈케 kon sung yore mare de sung mya ina ne dong de kan de cha yore de to gon sur no sha tuchin.
The question is the following. It's actually to Anand Bandeji, and with respect to the recitation of Pratimoksha Sutra. And I have understood from my Vinaya studies that according to Mula Sarvastivada tradition, the Pratimoksha Sutra is usually recited in Sanskrit. And for the Theravada tradition, I think it's recited in Pali. So his main question here is whether is it really necessary for the Mula Sarvastivada tradition to recite the Pratimoksha Sutra in only Sanskrit, And if they are not able to do so, will there be any implications or not?
Thank you very much for the question. I think whatever you have mentioned about the Patimokkha, in Theravada tradition we have our own Pali language about the Patimokkha. Though it is in Sanskrit written in Mula Sarvastivada, but in Theravada tradition we are following the Pali one. Pali ourselves, we have a Patimokkha itself. So when we are reciting the Patimokkha, it should be the Pali.
Hello. I would like to add some idea, because in Theravada tradition, and we use Pali language to record the teaching. So in order to preserve the original teaching of the Buddha, especially the Vinaya, we normally recite the Patimokkha in Pali language, but at the same time, the contents is also important. And because when we recite the Patimokkha, not all of the bhikkhus, we understand the Pali language, but so we normally have in Thailand, we have the translation of all 227 precepts. So most bhikkhus, or even the newly ordained monks, first need to learn on 227 precepts in that language. When they are at Uposatha, although they do not follow the Pali language, but at least they know what those 220 precepts are. So the reason why we recite the Patimokkha in Pali language is to preserve the original source, the original language of the Buddha Vinaya. Thank you.
Actually, there is no such a language, Pali. It is Sutta Mangani, the Buddha's mother tongue. As the language preserves the teaching of the Buddha, it is called Pali. Regarding Vaishnavic language, it is the language of Nigandas, Jain tradition. They use the language Vaishnavic, but in Upasampada ceremony, we recite only Pali recital of Patimokkha.
tanda ta kami ma na yong de zamba ta ma zo ki da tanda so yong do zo da so ndo ba ki chang na kan ji na bi me de zo ma se wo shu yong de ma zo tanda ja sha ta gu ju ze ji de ji ba ji chang do ji ba shi an to mo ge ne de ke chim bo ma bo ji ye ba ina yo ma zo ran so ge ta ji chi ju mo ma da ba ta ya ji lung chen ma da ba ta de ne de to mo ma yin bi ge ya me se de zo shu chenpo ji ke chenpo zi je, nga razon tumo ki yang ji nyamle ke che de zo, teke chi ya sibo ji ten ma tu ya ka ne ten mongpo ji ten ma shiong de yo re. Tene che de, nge ke tanda me se ki shu ya de la, ta nga zo ke yi de to le ya ke chenpo zi yung de, tan song ji jam ten de ke kanji ji de sun ya na, daga rang rang jia sha go re, ma to rang so su ke to le pa zin jiwa mongpo tang yang mun de se nge ke sam zi ji yung yo re. Richi ki majiwa ina, ronsoso tenda pa chape che ya kanga neta mongbo yungu duyu se nge ni yo res. Hongta chung sonji jom ten degi tsabi ki kano naga ki tim ji ma do sonji rangi suyo ma re te shisi ya manzo ta dewa shi de shun che. Je suyo je chewa yewe ki namba naga tengi du te, ngai ta yung de tanda nyen yung de, jasha pe guchu ko je ze je ta, kanzo kanga chiba jijang re ten duyu se, ta zo nane tama re ma do. Ta nge chiba shuya de, tanda nga zo ta zo de kong la tangi nge kong la zhuwa xuya de 아니 가슴 공기가 안에 세워 쉬고지 배 시사 농사기 되는 그 랜션스 안 그들이라 다나지 안간서 단다 농바도 좀 마음 채워지 아니 정함 잠문다 쉬고지 다 배제 땅그 요 말에 땅 투구 매와 있나 땅그 매와 있나 치료 전바도 저게 다이 자자다 정함 몸보지 또는 치시에다 년시지에 근데 몸보지 안간서 든지 싫어 지기 요 말에 선택 내대로 지 같이 그래서 양 손으로 동사 지라 자위 근데 대시대 동분의 소지 조된 되기 대시 조 잡아지래다 양 대시들이야 그 대시대 예와 세단으로 오지 간지 진행도 지기 나서 대
Hello. The question is the following. First of all, my respect to all of you. And listening to the three presentations this morning, I came to realize that we have almost 90% common in terms of our explanations of the Vinaya Sutra. And personally, I feel that the Vinaya text, in whatever language the Buddha must have taught, be it in Sanskrit or any other language, so I feel that it should be preserved in its original language and not to interpret or translate into other. And the reason why is when you start translating into another language, a lot of sometimes altercations and modifications happen due to the translator's note. So that is his personal view. But other people criticize those views by saying that if you do not translate the Vinaya text, then there will be not possible to understand the content of those texts and also to study it and to spread, to bring the Vinaya teaching to different countries. That will be difficult. So these are his own understanding. And second thing is about the, and also he feels that the difference may be due to ethnic background, due to different places, and one's languages, that we have all these differences. And his actual question is to Yana Ratnaji. And yesterday also, Pio Basuji made it very clear about the counting of the different features of Vinaya. And he feels that in this world, many other great major religions in the world use many other sources such as internet and many other ways to bring the teachings of their religion to different parts of the world and make it accessible to every kind of people in the world. But whereas we Buddhist monks are not doing that at a very strong level. So what do you think about this, and what must be the reason behind? And if it is done, will there be any consequences or not? And second thing is we have the four major schools in Buddhist, according to Vinaya, different schools, four major schools, the Mula, Sarvastivada, and Theravada, and so on. So another question is whether these four schools were being taught by Lord Buddha himself, or does this school exist during Lord Buddha's time, or is a creation later?
Thank you very much for interesting question. Whatever you said is true. The language should not be transferred, or it should not be translated to other language or other script. Whatever you are talking about is right. And sometimes in Brahmanism also we see, they call it the secret book of Buddhism or secret book of Brahmanism. Why it is secret? Because it is unchangeable. You cannot change. So if you are changing the form, maybe the attraction is going to less. So the secret is going to open to everyone. So I think whatever you mentioned is true. But in Mula Sarvastivada, maybe you are learning about the Sanskrit text. So this is the sacred book of the Mula Sarvastivada. But in the Pali tradition, we are trying to follow the Pali language itself. So Pali is secret for us. So we are not going to transfer it to other. The Pali, say for example, Venerable from Thailand already mentioned that Pali itself is the similar in Theravada country. We are not changing anything there. Just the letter is changing. Thai Tripitaka, they had written in the Thai alphabet. Sri Lanka, they are translated Sri Lankan alphabet. But the Pali is Pali. There's no change at all. Just sometime of whatever you mentioned, when I was in Japan, I saw that when they translated to Sanskrit to Japanese, they change. And sometimes the meaning and the word is not similar. So whatever you mentioned is true, and I accept it. It's also true that the Mula Sarvastivadya, they are following the Sanskrit script, and they have to follow that one, and we have to learn that one to learn about the Mula Sarvastivadya. And about the Theravada Vinaya, if we want to learn, maybe we have to learn through the Pali language. I think this, I accept whatever your opinion is. And in internet, of course, in the modern world, people want to know more about the different things, about the religion, society, politics, different things. So they want to get it very easily in their hand. So the net, of course, is also one of the tools for the modern world to propagate the religion or propagate the Dhamma. So I think there is nothing wrong to see the net or to use the net or to try to see more information about the different types of comments or the tags. I think it's very convenient for modern world. And this, I think there is nothing wrong to follow it. And another one, the second question was what? I forget that.
About the four schools, the origin of the four schools, whether it is there during the Lord Buddha's time or...
this is also another important question, I think. During the Buddha's time, are there any tradition or any Nikaya or not? Of course, there is nothing. There is no Nikaya at all. Because he's only one when he was arrived. Of course, we can see some sutta, Chula Vedala and Mahavedala. Sometimes they are talking about the Dhammadhara, Vinayadhara, Abhidhammadhara. We can see those words. But it does not mean this is the Nikaya. This is not the Nikaya, just specialized. Say, for example, in MBBS doctor, there are some doctor for teeth, some doctor for ears, some doctor for eyes. So different specialists are there. So during the Buddha's time also, I think there is no tradition or the Nikaya. It's just there are some specialized are there.